Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. It takes a bit for everyone to spool into the system. Thank you for joining us today. We have a great conversation planned. And if you're just now joining, thanks so much. We will get started here in a second. Okay, well, good afternoon and welcome to our conversation today as part of our Restart Kentucky webinar series. Today we are talking about all things COVID-19 vaccines and some of the developments that we're experiencing on the treatment side of the virus. We thought it would be kind of some good timing to revisit the issue of how we're treating the virus and where we are with the vaccines and talk a little bit about the role that Kentucky plays in all of this. I'm Kate Shanks. I'm Vice President of Public Affairs for the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. And it's great to have you all here. And before I welcome our panelists, I want to tell you a little bit about our Restart Kentucky program. And I also want to thank our sponsors in this effort, the Kentucky Community and Technical College System. They're a great partner of ours and do a lot of important work in a lot of different areas that we focus on. But we started Restart Kentucky back in March, actually. We've been at this a few months now. I think we've had nearly 30 different webinars or conversations where we've been able to talk a little bit about what's happening with the pandemic, help businesses understand what's expected of them and what needs to happen, and then talk a little bit about what our members are doing to help the cause. You can visit our Restart Kentucky website if you go to the Kentucky Chamber page, kychamber.com, and click on the Restart banner at the top of the page. You'll see all sorts of resources on healthy at work, the reopening schedule, which sometimes changes, as well as a recording of all of our webinars throughout the last few months. So please take a minute to visit that website when we wrap up today. We will be recording this session, and so if you need to hop away, that is one of the benefits of this virtual environment that we're all living in right now. And so we will be posting it on our Restart Kentucky website later today and sharing it on social media as well. Speaking of social media, I hope you're following the Kentucky Chamber at KY Chamber on Twitter. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. So you can learn more and more about what we're doing and get updates on these conversations as we plan them. So with that, I would like to introduce our expert panelists today. We have Dave Herring, who is the Regional President of North America for Pfizer Vaccines, Barbara Logan, Director of Research at St. Elizabeth Healthcare, and we have Dr. Kenneth Palmer, who is the Director, the Center for Predictive Medicine and Biodefense and Emerging Infectious Diseases at the University of Louisville. So welcome to our panelists. I know we have a lot to get covered. I think we're going to go ahead and get started with Dave. He's got a presentation. He's going to walk us through a lot happening at Pfizer these days on vaccine development. And so he's going to share his screen, and we're going to get started with his presentation and then do a little Q&A.
All right, just getting it all started. All right, can you see everything okay?
Yes.
Excellent. So thank you so much for having me and for this opportunity to speak with you today. As mentioned, I'm the regional president of North America for Pfizer Vaccines, and Pfizer has some very important long-standing partnerships here in Kentucky, including a research center of excellence site in collaboration that we have with the University of Louisville. So I'm really honored to speak to this group, really excited to be here virtually. And I have to say, I've worked a good part of my career in vaccines, and it's pretty fair to say that this is the most focus and attention that our work has gotten, and certainly the most in demand I've been in terms of speaking. Certainly, I can understand that with everything that's going on, and today I'm pleased to share some of my insights and updates with you, and looking forward to answering a few of your questions. I know all of us want to talk about COVID vaccine and most importantly, when it's going to be available. So today, I'm going to give you an update on our vaccine program. I'll talk a little bit more about the U.S. government's distribution planning, as well as how the U.S. government plans to cover COVID-19 vaccines during the pandemic. And then finally, I'll touch on a topic that is near and dear to me, especially at this critical time, But even beyond the pandemic, of course, the value of vaccines and what the value is that they bring to our society, not just in the middle of a pandemic, but certainly how important they are to public health, and particularly for all the workers who are the backbone of our economy. So I think it's probably fair to say that the number one question that I get is, when is a vaccine going to be available? My friends, my family, all of my sort of business school colleagues or undergrad colleagues continue to sort of text me and ask me what the status is. And of course, that's the most critical thing that we're working on. And it's really been a fast program that we've been undertaking here at Pfizer, as well as other manufacturers. And it is the most critical, as we have seen for this fall, being able to get our workers back, our kids back in school, back in college, and really getting back to the way of life that we're all accustomed to. So let me talk a little bit about where we are and where we started. We've had some really promising developments at Pfizer, and I thought maybe I'd walk you through a little bit of what's happened predominantly in the last 6 months. But if you look all the way to the lower left of this slide, the genetic sequence for SARS-CoV-2, which is the official name for COVID-19, was published in early January. And Pfizer had a collaboration already in place with this German biotech company called BioNTech on an influenza vaccine. And so when the genetic sequence was available, our partners at BioNTech already started doing work on their mRNA platform using the gene sequence from CoV-2. And they started animal studies already in March. So they were able to quickly create a candidate virus. Then we at Pfizer signed on with BioNTech in March 17th to be exact. And from there, you can see the quick progress that was made. We basically took the underlying technology and certainly important intellectual property from BioNTech, and we coupled that with Pfizer's tremendous vaccine capabilities, our manufacturing footprint, our strong clinical development group, our ability to do large-scale clinical trials, which really created this winning team. So the phase 1/2 trial, and for those of you who aren't necessarily familiar with all of the sort of elements of clinical trial development, you start in a smaller set of volunteers, and then you move to a larger set, with the goal, of course, being to make sure that we have a safe and efficacious drug or vaccine when we get to the end of the clinical trials. So the phase 1/2 trial started in Germany in April, started in the US in May. You can see 200 subjects and 360 subjects. And we were testing 4 different vaccine candidates. And from there, we were able to down select into the lead candidate, which we call B2. It's not exactly all that exciting, but its full name is listed there. And we were able to then start the pivotal phase 2/3 trial by the end of July 27th. That trial was originally scheduled to be 30,000 subjects. We expanded it to 44,000 to make sure that we were adding in a significant number of diverse candidates, as well as expanding the age range down from 18 and over to 16 and over, which we just announced a couple weeks ago. So now it's 44,000. We're sitting in a place now where we have about 32,000 subjects already in the clinical trial. And we're really proud of the minority population that we've been able to include, which is fantastic. And what we're planning to do is, of course, take data from that trial. And as our CEO has said publicly, by the end of October, our goal is to have the information to really know, does the vaccine work and is it safe? Then we provide it to the FDA, and they look through it, and we go for either a full license or an emergency use authorization, or both. And really, that's the timeline we've been on. So we're really looking to get doses into the US and around the world by the end of this year. And in parallel, what's been going on is our manufacturing site has been scaling up production. So typically, you would wait to see if a vaccine works in the clinical trials before you start spending money and putting in all sorts of capital into your sites. But of course, in a pandemic, we haven't done that. We've done those things in parallel. And we've been scaling up production with this goal of being able to supply tens of millions of doses of vaccine in 2020, and approximately 1.3 billion is the plan for 2021. Importantly, throughout this process, we didn't take any federal funding for the clinical development, the R&D or the manufacturing scale up. The goal all along from that approach has been to make sure that we had the flexibility and can go as fast as possible. However, as part of that, we did sign an agreement with the US back in July to supply 100 million doses, pending any regulatory approval. So only if we receive FDA approval will we supply them. And there's an option then for the government to buy an additional 500 million doses. Also, important to note, the US government has announced it'll supply all these vaccines for free, and they're advancing distribution plans to provide them to states to prioritize allocations, including critical infrastructure workers, healthcare workers, etc. The other thing that I really wanted to make sure and mention was this vaccine confidence industry pledge that Pfizer was certainly sentinel in signing on to, as well as other biopharmaceutical leaders. And really the goal here is to make sure that folks have confidence that we're only bringing forward a vaccine that has all of the science and rigor that you would expect. And so we know there's been a lot of press about sort of how this process is going to go. And so us and our certainly our industry colleagues around the world have also signed on to this for not just vaccines, but other therapeutics. And to keep at the center that we want to make sure that the safety and well-being of the vaccinated individuals is our top priority. We'll continue to adhere to all the high scientific and ethical standards that you would expect in the conduct of the clinical trials and the rigor of the manufacturing process, and only submit for an approval or emergency use once we have the demonstrated safety and efficacy that is designed, for of course what the FDA would expect. So it's very exciting. Certainly, it does none of us any good if we come to the market with a vaccine and people don't trust the process or they don't trust the vaccine. We want people, of course, to be able to have that confidence, take the vaccine, and help us get the protection that we need to really stamp out the coronavirus and make sure that we're prepared to move forward. So here I'm just going to transition quick to discuss some of the practical issues around vaccine distribution, coverage, and cost. So here's a model that was recently published by Operation Warp Speed and our friends at the CDC. So this is how they're thinking about, at a high level, how the distribution of the vaccines will work. So this is generic, not just to Pfizer. So contracted Operation Warp Speed manufacturers, that's not just Pfizer, of course, Moderna, J&J, others. And what they're really looking to do is make sure that they get the vaccines, the ancillary kits, which include needles, syringes, personal protective equipment, et cetera, all to the final administration sites. And so they're coordinating that work. We're working together, and you can see, starting from the left and moving to the right, here are some examples of administration sites that they're contemplating: pharmacies, long-term care providers, home health, Indian health, public health clinics, hospitals, doctors' offices, etc. So really, there's a broad range of areas. And of course, the CDC is working with its advisory committee on immunization practices to put in the recommendations on who should be prioritized for the vaccine and the initial doses. Certainly, we assume that in the beginning there will be less doses than people that need the vaccine, so that initial prioritization is critical to get it to essential workers, older adults, minorities, folks who have been hit incredibly hard by the virus. So we're still working with the ACIP to work through the recommendations. The CDC is looking for each state's vaccine distribution plan to be in place within the next month or so. So a lot of there's a few states that were in the pilot, and now they're working on plans to make sure that those are in place and that we can efficiently get the vaccine out to the people. Just a quick note on the traditional vaccine coverage and reimbursement. So there's no copay for ACIP, which is the advisory committee from the CDC, recommended vaccines under employer and commercial plans per the Affordable Care Act. And there's no copay for vaccines that are covered under Medicare Part B. However, it gets a little bit more complicated under Medicare Part D. Vaccine copays can vary under Medicaid and Medicare Part D, but uninsured children up to age 18 can all access vaccines for free under the Vaccines for Children program, which is VFC. So there's definite reimbursement in place. And again, the federal government has stated that they expect the product to be provided free of charge. As I've said here, during the pandemic in particular, it's a little bit atypical, right, from our traditional system, that the federal government is planning to purchase, if not all, most all of the vaccine and distribute it. And the providers, physicians, pharmacists, nurses would be paid a fee for administering it. And the US government is reviewing how to do that and make sure that those administration fees are covered. Post the pandemic, we can all look forward to that day. Should the vaccine need to continue to be used like a flu shot every year or every couple of years to continue to provide protection, there would be no copays for COVID-19 vaccines recommended by ACIP that are still in those commercial plans and covered under Part B. And we continue to work on ways to help with Medicare Part D and make that the case for those individuals as well. So finally, I really would like to speak just to the value of vaccines and the economics and the economic impact of immunization. I won't go through the long history of vaccines, but it's certainly been noted many times that, probably outside of clean water, vaccines have had one of the biggest impacts in life expectancy for humanity. So certainly it wasn't that long ago where we didn't have any of these vaccines. And so people had certainly a significant amount of mortality, especially in early childhood, resulting in a difficulty, right, to make it to adulthood and getting, further along in life. So in those pediatric ages, it was really where this mortality hit. It wasn't that long ago, probably, your parents, maybe your grandparents, who can remember the polio, measles outbreaks, et cetera. You can see that's still, 1950s, et cetera. I'll highlight the Spanish flu pandemic, which we all have heard about and killed 25 to 50 million people, was in 1918. It's said that pandemics tend to come around every 100 years or, within 100 years. Eerily, it's almost 100 years to the date between the Spanish flu and COVID-19. But there's been a ton of progress on flu as well as COVID, as well as other vaccine technologies. And certainly Pfizer has a proud heritage in that vaccine history, from early work in diphtheria antitoxins to technology approaches and developing the first bifurcated needle. We licensed the first 7-valent pneumococcal conjugate vaccine in 2000. It's given to all pediatric children, so babies. And we then augmented that and moved from a 7-valent to a 13-valent. And we're continuing to work on that technology. So a lot continues to go into the value of vaccines. And this is really where I want to highlight the annual impact of vaccine preventable diseases. So certainly what's critical to see on this slide is the economic impact of these different diseases. And what's notable about this study, right, is back from 2015, where they noted $8.95 billion of economic burden just of these handful of pathogens in 2015. And that they said that unvaccinated people accounted for nearly 80% of that burden. So certainly vaccines aren't 100% protective. However, they provide quite a bit of protection. And really, one of our goals is to make sure, of course, that people are getting vaccinated from these preventable diseases. If you drew that pie chart today and you included COVID, the numbers wouldn't be billions, they would be in the trillions, right? We've all seen the economic impact of, having people stay at home, having all these different industries curtailed from the lack of mobility, et cetera, and not having necessarily the workers that we need to be able to continue to move these industries forward. So finally, adapting in this new environment, we're really centered on patients, healthcare providers, and access. We want to ensure that patients, advocacy organizations, and employers have the relevant information to help protect against vaccine preventable diseases, that consumers and patients are aware of the recommendations and continue to get vaccinated. Healthcare providers have the information to protect the most vulnerable patients in particular, that we include those in the population who are under-vaccinated or underrepresented. We've seen certainly with COVID the impact on the minority population, African American, Hispanics, high-risk adults. And we want to support broad access, ensuring that folks have access to annual well visits, Medicare patients, reimbursement, and work on innovative programs to continue to facilitate vaccination so that we're all protected from these life-altering diseases, and that we work together both for now and future diseases to have a robust ecosystem for vaccine development. So with that, I really thank you for having me here, and I can take any questions now, or if you want to do it after all of us have spoken, that would be fine as well.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I think that was really interesting. That pie chart really caught my attention, especially the impact of the flu vaccine, right? I mean, and we're hearing all about how we have to be doing that right now. Everybody needs to start getting their flu shot, and we know that there's work coming on the COVID-19 shot. So I'm just wondering how this work is impacting your work on other vaccines for good, or if it's creating challenges and how you're managing that, or if you're learning from this high-speed process and can we apply that to other vaccines, because that economic impact is significant.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think people have all said in our company, how can we replicate what we did on COVID with our other vaccine development? Certainly our CEO has impacted on us that, we should be working like this. I don't know that, doing a vaccine in 6 to 9 months will be possible for other products. We've had, sort of unprecedented access to the FDA at every step of the way, which I don't think is something that, would happen moving forward. But there are lessons learned on how we can do this. The collaboration between us, states, private industries has been phenomenal, and I think that's something we can take away. I'm personally quite proud of how the sort of interest in vaccines has gone up. So I think prior to COVID, in the biopharmaceutical world, gene therapy, immune oncology, those were all the sort of sexy areas to be involved in. And now we're seeing a renewed interest in vaccines, which helps, right? From venture capital, private equity, investment, all of that then helps to, create new technologies, which we can all use to find new vaccines to preventable diseases. So I think there's a lot of takeaways that we can use.
Great. Do you have any specific projects or partnerships in Kentucky? I think you mentioned some of the work that's happened here that you want to highlight or share with the group.
Yeah, no, so exactly. So we have quite a bit that's been going on in the state of Kentucky. The one I was talking about is since 2018 for sure, Pfizer and the University of Louisville's Division of Infectious Diseases, they began a collaboration together. The university was our first center of excellence. So this is where we really look to make sure we have a handful of centers of excellence around the world, collecting epidemiology data, advancing our work in preventable diseases like pneumonia have come out of that partnership. And also in Jefferson County, Kentucky, the demographics mirror the US in general terms. So the racial, ethnic makeup, socioeconomic status, rural versus urban. So it's been this like ideal place to be able to sort of capture in this one county the broader US population, which is sort of unusual, right? So instead of having to go to a lot of different locations, we've been able to do it in this one spot and then use the results from there to extrapolate to the rest of the US.
It's fascinating. Thank you. I think with that, I think it's a good transition over to Kenneth Palmer. I know at the University of Louisville, and your all's work on the vaccine research maybe is at a different level than what we see with Dave. So I thought maybe you could kind of elaborate on what you all are working on at the university. And you're still muted.
Is that okay now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to talk here, and it really is an honor to follow on from Dave. So one of the things that's really unique and special about the University of Louisville, there are lots of things that are special about the University of Louisville, but one of the things that I'm most proud of is that we have one of the 12 regional biocontainment laboratories in the US. There are 12 regional biocontainment labs and 2 national labs, and what we have here in Louisville allows us to be at the forefront of testing new and emerging, evaluating new and emerging infectious diseases and testing new products that might be helpful for preventing or treating those new infectious diseases. So I direct the Center for Predictive Medicine for Biodefense and Emerging Infectious Diseases, and we were able to get going with research on SARS coronavirus 2 back in February, fairly soon after the first case in the US. So what we do is we offer preclinical services to biotech companies, academics, private research foundations, and government for evaluating whether products that they're developing might be useful for preventing SARS-CoV-2 or other emerging infectious diseases. And we're proud to be doing preclinical testing work for a Kentucky biotech company and for a national research foundation, and we're doing antiviral testing and screening for the NIH here at our regional biocontainment lab. The services that we offer really are, for SARS-CoV-2 is, very early on we developed engineered 3-dimensional human respiratory airway tissues that we could infect with SARS-CoV-2. So we could evaluate in vitro, in a test tube if you like, whether new antivirals or new vaccines might be able to prevent SARS-CoV-2. And one of the useful things I think we did early on was that we screened a lot of already approved FDA drugs, looking to see whether there were any products that were already on the market that already had safety data that then could be used for treating people with COVID-19, so that we could shorten the time to getting those products to patients. And in that process, we found, interestingly, that we have 2 products, antiviral products, in our portfolio at the University of Louisville that are useful for preventing SARS-CoV-2 infection, so or treating it. So one of those is AS1411, which was a drug that we were developing for cancer treatment, and that product we're working to get into a clinical trial for treating COVID patients later in the year. And in terms of vaccine development, we've been working, as I said, with a Kentucky biotech company and with a research foundation on vaccines that are different in composition from the Pfizer vaccine, to see if they have any potential for working against COVID-19. And that work is ongoing and is showing good promise. So we really are on the ground here trying to help industry and academia move their new research ideas and new research products forward so that we can help the process of getting new vaccines and new antiviral products to people who need them.
Excellent, thank you. And, we talk about COVID-19 and eventually, we'll have vaccines and have more treatments for it, but we have to worry about what's coming next. Maybe it'll take another 100 years and it's not going to be my problem, but perhaps it won't. And so, are you all working on anything interesting or exciting on that next big bug that's coming our way?
So I think so. So one of the things that we discovered in the University of Louisville portfolio was a broad spectrum antiviral product. And this works very efficiently to prevent SARS coronavirus 2 infection of engineered human nasal and respiratory epithelial tissues. And we have been working with pharmaceutical scientists to develop a nasal spray product. And the nasal spray product is an alternative to a vaccine. We believe it should help prevent SARS-CoV-2, and particularly in people who haven't yet been vaccinated with vaccines like the Pfizer vaccine, but also the people in the population who are immunocompromised, or for some reason, either they're very elderly or they're under cancer treatment or some other kind of immunosuppressive treatment where they may not respond adequately to a vaccine. And so we believe that our nasal spray product will help those people who need to be protected from SARS-CoV-2 from getting infected. The interesting thing about our product is that it has broad spectrum activity against many respiratory viruses. And so our hope is that once we get this product tested in the clinic, if it looks safe and looks effective, we will have a product that can be put on the shelf for the next pandemic, but also used for people who are at very high risk of respiratory infections like SARS-CoV-2, but for whom a vaccine is not likely to be completely efficacious. So we're excited about that product. We just heard today that the NIH will be giving us money to develop it and take it into a phase 1 clinical trial. And that we're very excited about that project.
Great, congratulations on that.
We've got a number of other things going on, but that's the one that I'm most excited about.
Great, that's fascinating. There's so much work happening in Kentucky, and we like to take a minute to just focus on it and spotlight it because it's not always something that you hear about. And there's so much work happening behind the scenes in the public health space to keep us all protected. So we really appreciate the work that you're doing on that. And I do want to talk to Barbara for a minute and kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about treatment, because we were talking about the clinical trials and we've talked about vaccines, but you all are working in the space of the treatment trials that are out there and providing those to your patients that come in. So just any general thoughts on, what we're learning on that side of the equation?
Absolutely. First off, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And anytime we can highlight the work that St. Elizabeth is doing, we're welcome to be part of it. You can tell from the work that Pfizer's doing and the work that Dr. Palmer at University of Louisville is doing, how collaborative and how quickly these teams are working together to make these treatment options available to the people of Kentucky and to the United States and to the world. And I think that's really what we can highlight here early on was a collaborative approach that everyone took to making sure that we had treatment options to the patients, whether that was repurposing current or antivirals that were already in existence, such as hydrochloroquine, antibiotics, azithromycin. So repurposing older drugs or drugs that may have had other indications, or promising new trials and really, really pushing and working with the FDA to get those to the forefront and get those to the patients. Some of you may not know that St. Elizabeth is a 5-hospital system right now. And what we did and what the administration did is centralized all of the COVID cases to one hospital. And that helped us out quite a bit in that we had all the resources at one location. That really helped with us limiting our personal equipment that were using and we may had limited access to at that time. And then we were able to really get a good idea of the patients, who they were coming in, what that standard of care looked like, and then to be able to provide them with the clinical trials that were coming into, that were coming on board so rapidly to be able to provide the patients with options for their care. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, how has the standard of care changed over time? I mean, we've been at this now, 7 months? I can't imagine how much you've learned since March on how to treat patients. Are you seeing significant change in that area? And, we're hearing about improvements in mortality rate and some of the changes that are happening with those that are most sick. What are you all seeing on the ground?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've really worked to work collaboratively with coworkers, with other institutions to find out what is the best options for the patients. Early on in March and April, so much information was coming out of China as to what worked, what didn't. You've really had to be open to new ideas and working with really all institutions within the United States to find these. We were very fortunate to be able to get remdesivir as part of their expanded access program early on before the state received their doses, and the state's been terrific to work with in providing remdesivir to patients. We were also really early on with the national protocol for convalescent plasma through Mayo Clinic. And so those were great options early on to be able to provide to the patients. And then we've added on several more trials that are looking at inhaled drugs, new investigational other drugs as well. Most of them are inhaled. All of this in an attempt to provide the patient with the most current and up-to-date options that we could. But you're right, as the standard of care changed from day to day, from week to week, the clinical team got smarter about what was working, what wasn't working. And it's really come full circle with now where they feel like they really do have a good standard of care. They have a good process of when a patient comes in, what is needed, when they start dosing different medications. And that was just not there in the beginning. I don't think it was there anywhere, right? You were just doing what you were doing and trying to help these patients survive.
So are these patients that are usually the sickest among those that have it, or are there some that, through telehealth or through outpatient services are visiting your facility, or is this, usually those patients that are the sickest that are getting participating in these trials?
Absolutely, right. So you were seeing that, we were giving these patients to those who were on oxygen. Now we're really looking, so they were inpatient trials, and they were looking at patients who were the most critical, had the ground glass opacity in their lungs, had pneumonia, really the worst symptoms that COVID had to offer. Now what we're seeing is as these trials develop and reinvent themselves, what they thought was going to happen in October is different than how they wrote that protocol in March. We're seeing not as many patients inpatient and a lot more patients who are COVID positive that are going home. So we're really looking at outpatient options for COVID positive patients, how we can help them, how we're working to bring those patients back into an environment where people feel comfortable treating them. So we're seeing patients in the ED a lot. That has really changed the dynamics of the hospital, how we've been working with patients, and telehealth has been phenomenal. And it's been such a great gift that we have and to be able to use and to really provide the patients the easiest mechanism to get care.
And you mentioned the standard of care in those early days. Is that continuing to evolve? And is that something that's really more of a organic process that occurs, or are you getting a lot of guidance from the federal level on how to care for these patients?
Yeah, the FDA has been amazing. I know that David spoke to that regarding the work that they've been doing with the FDA, and they have really stepped up to the plate and have done quite a bit of work. If you remember early on, hydrochloroquine was, first thought to be a great option for treating COVID, and it wasn't as beneficial as first indicated. They've transitioned through that First, they weren't treating with steroids. Now they are treating with steroids. It really has been a progression of some has been trial and error, but others really you have to go back to these industries like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, all these great sponsors that are doing the work, and they're doing the clinical trials, and they're doing them in a randomized clinical fashion so that it's very systematic. It's a very, very structured approach to the science, and that is only going to help people in the long run.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
If you had a crystal ball, which you do not, but if you did, what do these next couple of months look like? I mean, we're heading into flu season. We're indoors more. Are you prepared from the hospital standpoint, and you've got your equipment and your protocols in place? Like, how do you see these next few months?
Right. We continue to take on new clinical trials for COVID so that we have all of these options for patients that may come in that either need to stay in the hospital or on an outpatient setting. But really, they have these well-defined processes in place now through, we've got a great group of physicians at St. Elizabeth that are working to really create these plans for the patient, what works best, what timing, when do they need it, next steps for the patient. It's a very good. What they have right now is going to be good for the next few months. I don't see that we're going to see a big drop in cases of COVID. I think it's going to stay plateaued for a while, and hopefully it doesn't go up. But I would say that we're bringing in new trials. We keep working to try to identify new processes, and all that it is benefiting the patient, right? All we want to do is make sure that the patient goes home.
Right. Thank you. And I do want to take it back to Kenneth for a minute. I have a follow-up question, but I want to let everyone know that our chat is open. If you have questions for our panelists, you are welcome to put them in the chat box. But before we wrap, I do want to ask Kenneth to give us an update on a project that we have been following here at the Kentucky Chamber. It's the Coimmunity project. We've had some discussions about it on other webinars and the work that the University of Louisville is doing. Tell us a little bit about that and the nature of the testing and what you're learning from that. It's kind of interesting, being in Jefferson County and thinking about Dave's point earlier about how the population and the demographics really represent the U.S. as a whole, which makes your all's Coimmunity project that much more, I think, fascinating. So maybe tie those together.
Sure. So the Coimmunity project involves random testing of people in the community. These are not hospitalized patients, and they're not necessarily sick people. They're asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic people in the community. We invite people to participate. So a mailer goes to their home, and they're asked if they would like to participate in a random testing. And this goes throughout Jefferson County. And the study is designed so that we sample across the demographic in Jefferson County. So we're sure we do our best to have good ethnic and age distribution in the sample that we're getting. And we have done this in about 2,300 people twice so far. So each round of testing is every 2 months. And we have just completed the second round of testing. We're testing for active viral infection with a nasal swab. We're also, all the volunteers are providing a blood sample so we can look for historical infection with antibodies. And what we saw in the first round, which was conducted in May, was that our local incidence was fairly low. There are about 10-fold more people who had antibodies than were currently infected at the time. So there was a historical infection. And the incidence, we computed the incidence of SARS-CoV-2 infection in Jefferson County to be about 10-fold higher than what the public health department was aware of. So that's it's not special for Jefferson County. I think a lot of geographical locations in the US have found a similar outcome. And then we've just completed the second round of testing, We haven't announced the data, but what I could say is that we have a higher level of infection now than we did back in May. So it's all very interesting data, and I think we'll announce the outcome of the second round in the next week or so. We have seen, similar to many other geographical locations in the US, that the burden of SARS coronavirus 2 infection is heavier in poorer and in more ethnically diverse populations. So the infection rate in our Jefferson County African American and Hispanic population is higher than in the white population, and that it basically reinforces the fact that Jefferson County is very much representative of the general US demographic. The people, underprivileged people, have more SARS-CoV-2 infection. We have around 10-fold more infection that we predict than the official numbers suggest. And that's probably associated with asymptomatic people mainly. And it's been very instructive. And what we're doing with these numbers really is to inform the local government about what we think is going on with the epidemic in the community. And we are also now looking forward to this question about post-COVID syndrome. So we know that it's likely that there'll be long-term health consequences to COVID infection for people who have recovered. So we're using the Coimmunity project to recruit people who we know have recovered and who have mounted an immune response, so that we have a study population where we can start asking what longer term health consequences there might be for people who have recovered from SARS-CoV-2 in Jefferson County.
The data is fascinating. We have been following that since you've started doing it. And I think that just the instances of asymptomatic, as well as individuals that have tested positive for the antibodies, but didn't maybe exhibit symptoms, or maybe they did early on and before they could get tested and that was mild. And I did see a question pop up about fevers and those testing. And, you know, I think what they're getting at here is now that we're expanding testing to the general public, you're seeing a lot more asymptomatic cases or people without fevers.
Yes.
That are testing positive, right? As we would expect, as compared to the spring. So interesting. So I think before we wrap, I'll send it back to Dave. If you have any, final comments. I think we're hearing so much about the vaccine, and those of us on social media can be overwhelming, all the content. I think what's the most important thing, as a mother, all of us out there that are watching, that you want to convey to citizens as you all roll out these vaccines on the importance of getting it and the safety of it?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, while we've done this very quickly, we haven't cut any corners. So we're doing things in parallel, but we're not skipping steps. And so, we're talking about the current trial that's going to have, north of 40,000 people enrolled. So we're really testing this in a huge population. And, to me, that is one of the things that should be most important. If we're going to see, a broad-based issue, we're going to see it there. We're going to have information on whether the vaccine works. And to me, that's one of the most important things for people to realize is we're doing it quickly, but not by skipping steps.
That's important for sure. And Barbara, any final comments that you might have on from the healthcare community and the advice that you have for those watching on stopping the spread of it and caring for those who are most sick?
I would say that continue to get care when needed. Don't wait to come in and then get too far before you need to become inpatient. Wear your mask. Do what you need to do in terms of your distances and exactly, and just be really smart about, you know, your hand washing and being really smart about your, you know, keeping your distance. I think if we do all these things and we continue to do these things, and then along with the vaccine, we're really going to see a reduction in COVID and hopefully get to this post-COVID world. It would be good to see in the next year or so.
Well, thank you so much, Barbara, Dave. Oh, Kenneth, go ahead.
Can I ask Dave a question?
Sure.
Sure.
About distribution. So I understand that your vaccine requires pretty unusual cold storage.
Yep.
And how does the UPS hub here? We have a UPS transportation hub here in Louisville, Kentucky. How is that going to interact with Pfizer for getting your vaccine distributed?
Yeah, so I mean, right now we're planning to ship the vaccine direct out of our different sites. So we certainly have different, you know, folks that we can use for distribution. I don't know exactly, you know, what we're doing with UPS versus FedEx or some of the other folks, but we have developed a special shipper for the vaccine, which includes dry ice to keep it at those really cold temperatures, such that you don't need the trucks themselves to be at you know, a super sort of cold perspective, which gives us more flexibility and ability to use more standard trucks, and also provides a way to store the vaccine at some of the sites if they don't have those ultra low temperature freezers.
Right. Yeah, because I guess it's not very common for a doctor's office to have a -80.
No, definitely not.
I can't imagine the level of problem solving, Dave, that your company is constantly focused on. You must have quite the team. So thank you for all of your work on this.
Yeah,
that's great. And great point, Kenneth, on UPS. You know, we have a whole biologistics industry that has built up around our logistics hubs, and certainly with UPS. So it's a great resource, and, you know, we're the logistics capital for the US and for the world. So, you know, it's a great role that we play, and we're happy, Dave, to help you with that in any way here in Kentucky. Another great partnership.
Great. Yeah.
But thank you all so much, Barbara, Dave, Kenneth. I think this has been a really great conversation, and we look forward to the rollout of your new Coimmunity data, and of course, tracking the vaccine development and the treatment discoveries that you all have, Barbara, at St. Elizabeth. So we look forward to continue to follow that. And for all of you watching, please follow us on social media, and we will be posting a recording of this webinar and sharing promotions for future webinars. So please be sure to follow us. And with that, thank you, and everyone be safe.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.